Running Sentences presents The Lost Adventures of a Maybe Hero. Part 7. Discovery. Things are not going well for Leonardo as he awakens to find himself training to be a superhero now, which is not exactly what he wants. This is a work of fiction, and he names characters, businesses, events, and incidences within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, real incidences, real situations, real life, and/or fictional events, situations, characters, events, and so on, is purely coincidental. Copyright 2022, Michael Henry. All rights reserved. "It's time to wake up, Mr. Leonardo." The sound of Daniel's voice broke through the remainder of the sleep that had at some point taken over Leonardo. He groggily opened his eyes and blinked. The faint sound of music that felt like it was meant to create some sort of energy and hype to it was playing somewhere, and it felt silly in this moment as he sat up and looked at the nightstand, at his nightstand. The cell phone that had been there was gone. "Ah, good, you have awoken. Your training is to begin at once. What are you looking for, by the way? All that is over there is a nightstand." There was a phone at some point last night on my nightstand." "A phone? A phone? Who gave it to you and how did you get it?" I don't know. It appeared when I was asleep, when I took a call, and after I fell asleep again. It isn't there now, and I just wondered if it would be, that's all." "How can you say that's all? This place is so locked down that we can't even squeak without it being known by the people monitoring us." Daniel had wildly pointed off towards the corner, where for the first time Leonardo noticed a camera. It was the usual affair of a security camera, red light droning on and on with its lens positioned towards the bed. If that's the case, then it was probably done by the people who keep you down here, I guess. As I said, I was asleep, and I don't really know anything. Did you say something about training, though, by the way?" "I did, yes. I got a letter when I woke up, stating that the objectives for bringing you here was to train you to become the hero you need to be." Leonardo blinked and looked at Daniel, who had no papers in his hands. Was he just supposed to trust this man, simply because he was told it was so? "Would you mind showing me this letter?" The man looked at his hands and then realized he did not have said letter in it. Then rapidly began to pat himself down, searching for it. A few reaches into his spandex pants turned up nothing. "Shoot, I must have left it elsewhere. I'll go get it while you get dressed. But hurry, we don't have time to waste away while we should be training. So up, young man, and get ready for rigorous things." The last thing Leonardo wanted to do at this moment was train. He also did not want to get out of bed, and with the man Daniel already heading for the door, heading out, waving his finger at him to get up and out of bed, Leonardo was shaking his head no as he laid back down and stared at the ceiling for another minute or two. Sleep did not return, and so he threw off the covers and got up. "I do hope this training isn't going to be hard. I'm not good with difficult things. I can do them, but the energy it requires to make it so is rather annoying." The talking to himself comforted him in this unknown place, as he wandered towards his new bureau, hoping to find some clothes that looked normal. He was greeted by colorful spandex that had a bit of a superhero feel to it. His search went deep into the bureau, hoping it would allow for maybe sweatpants or a sweatshirt, or have nice and more comfortable clothes than spandex. But no, there was no luck to be had there, and he settled on the springy cloth that clung to every inch of him in the worst way possible. The walk to the door and out of the hallway in search of Daniel was not fun. How superheroes walked around in spandex, gripping them here and there, and potentially squeezing him, because it didn't quite fit? Well, he didn't know. All he could do was hurry over to the first door on the right, to the ladder, and knocked on it, hoping that he had the right one for Daniel's room. There was no response, so he opened the door to see what might be going on inside. The room, of course, looked much like his did, but did not have Daniel in it. There was a lot of little things and clothes thrown about, like it had been hurriedly searched through by Daniel. At least he hoped that was the case. It made sense, since Daniel had gone off and said he was looking for the letter he was given. At least Leonardo was hoping that was the case. "Hello, Daniel, are you in here?" A door near the back was thrown open that Leonardo had not seen. He blinked a few times as Daniel emerged from what looked to be a bathroom with a puzzled expression. "Oh, where did I put that thing?" The sight of the bathroom, however, had distracted Leonardo enough that he backed out of the room and made a run for his own room. The sudden and very real urge coming to him since he hadn't visited a bathroom in a little while. The dash to find the secret door into the bathroom in his own room was made in record time, and he found the door with no trouble, as there was a random door handle sticking out of the wall. A few minutes later, he was back in the hallway, feeling much better, and noticed that Daniel was rapidly climbing up the ladder, so he hurried to follow. He really did want to see this letter. Crawling up and out of the hatchway, Leonardo expected to find Daniel searching the kitchen, but the man was already gone by the time he got up there. The other woman, whose name he'd managed to forget, was there, and she looked over at him from her newspaper as he pulled himself up. "Is something going on?" Daniel said something about training me and that he had a letter to prove that this was his new job, but he lost said letter and I think is now in full-on search mode for it, I think. She nodded and waved her hand at the door towards the hallway. "He went that way." Leonardo took a few steps and then stopped. Excuse me for being a bit rude, but I seem to have forgotten your name, Miss Francine." "Ah, right, thank you, Miss Francine. Is that your superhero name as well, by the way? Just so I know and I don't go around calling you something you aren't." The newspaper came down once again as she looked over at him skeptically. "I've given up on my superhero name a long time ago. It was stupid anyway, so you can't call me it. But if you must know, and now I feel I must tell you, it was the Flying Bird." "Oh, that's a nice name. Was the bird referring to two things at once? A double entendre, as people say?" "Yes." He nodded as politely as he could, and shut his mouth. His fear being he would say something stupid because a hero with a super name that had two meanings, well, it was ripe for some jokes somewhere, even if he couldn't think of them at the exact moment. And she probably had heard all of them about 1,000,000 times or so. Best not to touch that subject, as he hurried away. The hallway felt unfamiliar as he entered it, and he wasn't sure why, except for maybe that it was missing doorways and just went straight onward this time. He wondered if there might be some superhero work that changed it, but if that was the case, why hadn't they just made a ramp upwards and escaped? The only thing he could do was walk down it towards the end, hoping for the best. He made it halfway before stopping as a door handle became noticeable sticking out from the wall. Much like the hidden bathroom, it was mostly unseeable until one was directly on top of it. Leonardo shrugged and opened this door to see what he might find this time. In there was one thing Leonardo had not expected to see. The space before him might just be empty and boring for all it was in there. What was in there was actually rows and filing cabinets about 3 stacks deep inside of a small room. But that wasn't really all that interesting to look at, and why would superheroes have it? Leonardo found himself looking for Daniel, who was over at one of the large cabinets with its drawers open, looking over things. Daniel? Yes, what is it? I'm busy." "Are you still searching for the letter, or have you begun looking for something else?" Daniel recoiled in horror at the thought that occurred to him. He glanced down at what was in his hand and then slid it back into the filing cabinet and closed that. "Oh, I seem to have been caught up in one of my tangents. Sorry, I'm a bit of a stickler for things when my mind realizes it needs knowledge. It is apparently one of my powers. I crave knowledge even if I already know it. I think I've read these files a few times over the years as a result of trying to find something." He grasped about his pockets once again, and this time a crumpled letter emerged. Daniel held it out, and Leonardo grabbed at it and took it away, and then stepped a few steps away. Found his hands shaking as he opened it, and couldn't figure out why. It was a letter stating what someone should do. It wasn't like they were going to sign it and give away who was ordering people around. Why was he scared of this? He opened it up and tried to get a few of the crinkles out so it would be readable. Dear Daniel, the government and interested parties have given you a new chance at redemption. We need you to train the hero, the masked butler, aka Leonardo, who may not appear to have much potential, but it is there thanks to his family. P.S. Train hard and fast as he is needed elsewhere. Hugo. So it was signed, and Leonardo looked over at Daniel, who was now by his side, and grabbed at his arm. The realization on the young hero was that training was now about to commence, coming down hard on him. To the gym we go, young apprentice, to the gym we go. And before Leonardo could protest, he felt himself being dragged along. Through the hallway he was dragged, not really able to do anything because the grip from this hero was rather strong and tight. Incredibly strong, to the point where he figured he might have a bruise on his arm by the end of it. The journey did not take very long, thankfully, as they went down the hallway to another hidden door and through that. Here he found himself in what was a gym, fully fitted out for one to work out in. The only thing potentially missing was a climbing wall, from what Leonardo could tell. Alrighty, Mr. Masked Butler, what's your weaknesses, strength-wise? Leonardo shook his head, confused. Shouldn't this man already know? He wasn't a superhero, so he didn't have any superpowers or anything like that. And so, everything was probably an issue for him. Well, I think I'm not good at much, so potentially a light jogging or punching a bag filled with air might help me somewhat. Oh, punching bag, those are always fun. We have one over here. The two had walked over towards a full-sized heavy bag, and Daniel tapped at it as he went by, causing the bag to sway. This will be a good measure of your strength to see what we are working with. Punch away. Shouldn't I get a pair of gloves to protect my hands? No, you'll be fine. Swing away. Leonardo reeled back his right arm, the worry that this was going to hurt running through his mind. The alarm bells were in full alert and ringing in his mind as well, but things slowed down to a crawling as he launched his fist towards the bag. It was only a split second for his hand to touch the rough canvas, and the bag did not move even an iota of an inch or a centimeter or anywhere at all. His hand felt like it crumpled into the bag, and he withdrew it as fast as he could. An all-around numbness went through his arm, shooting up and down it as it dangled by his side, now feeling mostly useless. Did you throw your punch yet? Yeah, Daniel, I did. It didn't work. Really? Yes, really. You can come around and see the faint handprint I left on it, on this bag, or that my arm isn't working much. Daniel did come around, and with a look of pity examined both the bag and his arm, and then shook his head. Then he decided to bring Leonardo over to something a little less strenuous activity-wise, namely, slightly walking or jogging on a treadmill for half an hour before exhaustion set in, and he was let go by Daniel, who told him to go find the kitchen and food. This small reprieve had allowed him to go clean himself of his sweat in his bathroom, and it only took a few minutes to shower and change into something else, but he took his time. There was no rush, aside from his grumbling stomach, which he put aside just to have a moment in front of the mirror to look at himself. A haggard face greeted him when he looked. This was going to be his life from now on. It might kill him, or worse, leave him just alive enough to crawl out and then die, having barely gotten to freedom. His stomach grumbled again, and he tried to think of the last time he'd ate, so he headed out. Leonardo had crawled up the ladder and into the kitchen for the second time today. This time there was instantly a smoothie concoction pushed into his hand when he was safely out of the hatchway. He stared at the beige-looking liquid that had some solidity to it. What is this? It's our food, packed with tons of nutrients and all the things a body needs, like vitamins. Okay, but what's in it? Stuff? Veggies, I guess? Meat? Vitamins probably thrown in there at some point? Stuff. Leonardo looked doubtfully between the smoothie drink and Tom, who had thrown him around the other day. It was Tom, right? He wasn't totally sure, and he wasn't sure if he should trust this hero. But did he have a choice? Between his stomach growling at him and the people with superpowers doing whatever they wanted, it didn't feel like it. Tentatively, he raised the drink towards his lips. Whatever this concoction was, it didn't have a taste, and slipped past his mouth, and then down his throat with a slow, sticky feeling. Leonardo found himself nearly gagging on the stuff, but kept gulping, since dying by choking on a liquid did not have a nice sound to it. Ick. You should get used to it. Anyway, you should probably head out to our outdoor area for your next session of training. Tom waved, and then went down the hatchway below, leaving Leonardo alone. To this, he glanced about towards the window in the outdoor patio area, and then towards the cup with the mostly finished liquid. Should he finish the rest of this? It wasn't really good, and it sort of just was there. Or just go outside and see what doom awaited him there. He put down the drink near the sink faucet, hoping that placing it there would be okay, at least to drop it off right now, and if he got in trouble, so he just put it down for saving it for later. He went outside to the backyard, with its setup of sunlights and fake grass, the feeling of flying through the air returning to him the second his foot touched the rough plastic. It was not a memory he wanted, and he almost stepped back inside. He noted that Natalie was sitting out there, in the middle of this lawn, meditating in a calm, cross-legged yoga fashion. Was she to teach him something now, or was he to just stand there and look and get some sunlight from these lights? I can feel your presence, Mr. Leonardo, or Masked Butler, or whatever you're calling yourself, and yes, I am here to teach you. What am I being taught? We have found that by getting in touch with your inner self, it will bring out your powers within. I don't think I have powers. Any of them. Natalie, whose eyes were closed and seemed zen-like with the way she was, remained unmoved. Leonardo moved further onto this backyard lawn and sort of still standing there. Okay, so, what am I to do since you believe I have these powers? Sit and calm down. That's just gonna put me to sleep. Sit and calm down. He sat down on the ground, trying to get comfy. The one thing he did not do was attempt to sit cross-legged, all because he was afraid that, having never sat like that, he wouldn't be able to know how to do it. And if he tried that, and was not getting it right, and was trying to work on that instead of working on calming down, he would get yelled at for concentrating on trying to get that right instead of whatever meditation was going on. I am seated and ready for something to happen, so what do I do now? She remained silent, and so he sat there, bored, looking around, trying to figure out how this was happening in his life. With nothing to look at, though, when he eventually laid back and closed his eyes. He opened them in what felt like a second later, but he found himself back in his home garage. He blinked at this, then figured that maybe it was some sort of Zen thing, since he had no idea how those situations worked. And with a shrug, he went along with it, looking around the empty garage and wondering why he was here of all places. Then he saw himself being surrounded by the goons who had drugged him. He stopped and stared as he could only watch himself slump over and then be carried out towards one of the garage door exits. A surge of panic followed as he realized that he might be able to get to know where he was. Yes, we followed what you wanted, Jeeves. The man will be dropped off with the idiots who are trapped. The mob won't get him. Leonardo froze and turned to see the man who had kidnapped him, and there next to him was Jeeves. What? His mind raced and tried to figure it out. Was he making this all up in his head? Did this really happen? The sound of a car engine outside made him rush outside, though. Following himself seemed a much more important task if he went straight to wherever this hole in the ground is. Outside, a sedan car was getting ready to leave, and Leonardo chased after it as it started moving. He had no idea what he was going to do or if he would catch up to it, but the car was moving, and he ran to catch up to the trunk and throw himself at it. His fingers barely caught the edge of the rear of the vehicle near the rear window where there was barely a grasp hold. Expecting the vehicle to hit the brakes when the sudden weight hit the back of the car, he was surprised. It kept driving, and he scrambled as best he could onto the trunk lid and held on for dear life. The car swished through the back roads and then out onto the highway. There was even a cop car in front of them, with its lights blaring, allowing them to drive fast and hard down the road with little care. Leonardo clung on, fearing falling off as they drove. But it didn't seem like he was going to fall off, and so he wondered if he could let go, but he did not. It just didn't seem right. What felt like morning was soon gone as the sun rose, but hidden under heavy clouds in the sky. The car kept going and going, with Leonardo lost as to where he was, and the signs were zipping by too quickly to read or to get to know. Finally, though, the cop car in front signaled that they were headed off the highway towards an exit, and they slowed down enough so that signs became readable. It was enough to allow him to read a nearby one that said, "Dust Town Mine, next exit." The ride did not stop as they drove through winding roads to this small town. It slowed a bit, which was nice because, while not apparently visible to humans, bugs kept hitting Leonardo. He enjoyed the slower speed, which allowed him to wipe his face as they went. Apparently, the place they were going to was not easy to get to as they kept slowing and turning onto new roads. The one thing that was obvious, though, was that they were getting higher up in altitude. Not a great deal higher, but perhaps a small mountain higher. The sun had nearly fully dipped down in the sky by the time the ride came to a halt, and this halt was to be a short one, as it was at a gate, one that was guarded by military-looking guards, or at least ones who liked to wear camouflage. One of them had come over and had a brief conversation with the driver that Leonardo didn't hear, then briefly looked over the car, and for a second Leonardo and the guard's gaze locked with one another. Fear shot through him, and he feared he was about to have a heart attack with the way his heart had jumped in his chest. The guard, if he did notice him, didn't seem to do anything about it as they turned and gave the thumbs up to the guard shack. The gates soon began moving out of the way, allowing them to continue their motoring journey. This trip finally ground to a halt in front of a cavernous mine entranceway. With the vehicle now stopped, Leonardo jumped off the back and backed away while keeping an eye on things. 4 people got out of the vehicle and 2 went around towards the trunk itself, opening it up and pulling his body out. The other 2 who'd gotten out of the vehicle went to a nearby shack and came back with a stretcher of some sort and wheeled it over towards Leonardo's still unconscious body, which was then plopped onto it. With that done, the foursome wheeled towards the mine, and not wanting to be left behind, Leonardo ran after them. He could see the stretcher being wheeled towards what looked to be an elevator as they approached the mine entrance. But as he ran, he hit something that wouldn't let him go any further into this place, and in fact he bounced right off of the front entrance. There was nothing there, but he could not go any further. He blinked, seeing a shimmering thing as he fell backwards and things started getting fuzzy. With a jolt, he sat up on the plastic grass and blinked. He was back in the backyard of the hole in the ground, wherever this cave might be, feeling like something had hit him. By something, or potentially run into a wall, came to him. A glance around him, that Natalie was now sitting by his side, looking very concerned about what had happened to him. "Leonardo!" Yeah, I had a dream, I think, but it was very real. I felt like I was finding out where we are. Does the Dust Town Mine mean anything to you?" She shook her head no, and they both lapsed into silence as they considered things. He lay back a bit, trying to think, leaning on his arms to try and comprehend what he'd seen. It felt like a dream, yet real. Was this a superpower, or was just this his mind going on fancy adventures? "Can you describe what happened?" Oh, it's rather simple. I went to sleep and I woke up in a sort of spirit form or dream form, but I may have gone a little bit back in time to see me being taken by Hugo and company. Did you feel like it was a superpower or just a dream? Dreamlike, but I'm not really sure. It ended at a cavernous mine, which is where I think we are. Do you want to see if this theory you'll have that it's a dream is true or no? How would we do that? She held out her hand, touching his forehead, and he instantly slumped back over. He sat up again and found himself out in front of the cave entrance. It didn't make much sense in his mind now, as he looked about. If this place had been where they were put, inside a cave, then how had he seen thunderstorms and rain-like clouds gathering over the hole into the living room? Leonardo rose from his seated position, rubbing his nose, which hurt. A quick glance around showed steam vents sending out steam from the ground, but nothing else of interest around this entranceway. And since the entranceway wasn't allowing him into the cave itself, he turned and looked towards the steam vents once again, and slowly got up, crawling his way towards the nearest one. The hot air that came out of it in wisps and drabs of faint smoke, but it did not seem to overwhelm him, and that felt nice, and felt like it might allow him to try and get down it. The grated plate covering the hole seemed to not be held down by anything, and so, with all of his strength, Leonardo tried to grasp under the edges of it, but found his fingers weren't able to get a full-on grip of it. Oh, a naughty escape! A prong of some sort smacked into his back, and then a pulse shot through his body, causing Leonardo to convulse. His limbs flayed about and then went rigid. Now, who do we have here? The man approached, kicking at him, which put Leonardo, who had fallen onto his side, to his back. Come on, I can see you shimmering in the faint light. No need to hide who you are. It's okay to come out of hiding. The shocks were still running through Leonardo, who felt like he could do nothing, but the foot of the man, who looked a bit like Hugo, came stomping down near his head. I said come out from under that shell! The convulsions had now stopped, and Leonardo decided to shut his eyes and hope that he was back in the backyard cell. The bright, harsh lights coming from the sunlights greeted him once again, but Leonardo did not want to get up once he opened his eyes. He felt like he was panting, panicking, and his back hurt. The sound of a soft thump from Hugo's footstep still rang in his ear. What did you learn this time? Hugo is at the dust mine, and he seems to be a keeper of sorts. What do you mean? He slowly sat up, shaking his head, trying to get the noise out of his ear, but it wasn't working, and his hand covered it up to see if that could stop it. When I woke from whatever you did to me, I was outside in the mine once again. There isn't much there but some steam vents. I figured since I can't go into the mine itself through normal ways, I would try the vents. Only I seem to have been spotted, and Hugo could see me and fired some sort of electrical device at me, which stopped me cold. Oh, okay. Well, I guess that's enough for today. I don't want to overwhelm you. I think you should get some more food and then get some sleep. You aren't going to tell me if that was a superhero power that I experienced, or... She frowned. It is potentially, yes, but only you will know for sure. She had gone up and was offering her hand, and so he grabbed a hold of it and was helped off of the hard plastic. There is one thing bothering me, though, and this. How do you tell time down here? Is that a big problem for you? Well, if what happened to me when I went to sleep is real, and I have a sense for night and day and what's going on, then I might be able to put something in my mind together. There are many missing puzzle pieces here. Oh, well, sorry, but we don't know. Other than when the lights out here get turned off, we don't really have an idea of when time changes. Exhaustion had overtaken Leonardo at some point in his walk back towards his bedroom, and then by the time he got there, all he could do was stare at the bed. It was not a comfortable looking thing to look at. One might call it a paper-thin mattress, and sheets. He'd slept in it last night, and if last night was in fact night, he shook his head and went over towards the bed once again. There was the wondering thought about if the cell phone would reappear at some point during his sleep, and he did his best to settle on what was now feeling like a very stiff bed, and closed his eyes. A loud, bleary alarm that rang and rang until Leonardo got up. When he sat up, finally, he looked about for an alarm clock, but could spot no such device in his room. A further glance around showed him that there was a speaker actually on the ceiling, one that he had no chance of reaching. With an exaggerated tiredness, he threw off his blankets and got out of bed, flipping off the security camera while he got up. And a short time later, he was back in the workout room with Daniel, going through the motions. He tried punching. It didn't do much, so he stuck to light jogging until tired and was excused by his trainer. His next stop was back with Natalie once again in the backyard, sitting on the plastic grass once again. He did not have an out-of-body experience this time, no matter what Natalie or he tried. A few hours felt like it passed while the two tried to get him to hone in on it, but with no success. Natalie let him go to do other things. Mostly, he figured, to get away from his grumbling stomach. After having had another liquid dinner, Leonardo had retreated to his bedroom. Days went by like this, the same thing over and over again. Workouts, training, eating beige, slightly edible food, and then back to his room. It was starting to get to him, so one day he decided he just didn't want to leave his bedroom. He sat there, waiting for something to happen, to break the monotony of it all. He hoped there would be some sort of reaction by anyone, but as time passed, no one came for him. There was no response other than an angry stomach which wanted food. He got up and began his trek to the kitchen. The trip up there was quiet and uneventful, and even once up there, no one bothered him. He found himself alone, and so he began searching through the cabinets below the counter for anything edible aside from beige smoothie. There was plenty of boxes with packets and sachets of things that he couldn't really tell because they were all white little packets, and there seemed to be little else. Leonardo kept digging, just in case there was some well-hidden treat to be had, and to save himself from having to taste the same flavors over and over again. He was deep in one such cabinet, on his knees digging through it, when he swore he could hear the sound of a phone ringing. He began pulling himself out of this space, since the noise did not sound like it was coming from inside the cabinet. The ringing did become much clearer the second his head came out, and he looked around to see a phone in the hand of Hugo, who stood on top of the closed hatchway. "Mr. Leonardo, good to see you." "Is it Hugo? That is your name, right? And you are the one keeping the heroes here, right?" This seemed to cause an odd twitch to cross the man's face. "Saving the world from bad heroes, is that such a bad thing? And I don't think that matters much right now. I'm here about you, not them." Leonardo, who was still knelt over so that he could get into the low cabinet, slowly got up so that he was standing. He knew he wasn't going to be able to do anything to this supposed superhero, but at least he could face him, though that prospect now sounded terrible in his mind. "What do you want from me?" "To know how things are going with your training, and also to learn how you've managed to get out of here." Leonardo felt himself go cold. "And what do you mean by that, sir?" "Your powers are awakening, and I think you have a form that lets you out of here wandering about where you aren't wanted. And that's not good." "Well, that sounds very nice. If I had that power, I don't have any powers to speak of, so—" Hugo shook his head no. If that meant he didn't believe him or something else, he had to guess at that. The phone in Hugo's hand was tossed over to Leonardo, who barely had time to react. He did mostly catch it after a bit of fumbling. "An acquaintance of yours wanted to talk to you. Make it quick, and no trying to escape." The man wandered off, and Leonardo watched to make sure that the man was far enough away to not hear him talk. He mentally checked himself, as Hugo probably had listening devices all over the place. The phone found its way to his ears slowly. "Hello? Who wants to talk to me? Sir, it is good to hear your voice again. We have much to discuss. Jeeves, if it was you who sent me down here? I may have helped get you down there, sir, yes, that much is true. But I did not send you down there. What had been said twisted about in Leonardo's mind, trying to find some rhyme or reason to it. It wasn't doing that, so all he could do was shake his head. Fine, what is it you wanted to talk to me about? Ah, yes, I've heard that you have honed in on your powers, which I think is a good thing, so hopefully that means the weather will finally clear. What? You're blaming me for the weather? I don't have superpowers, Jeeves. Whoever told you that is lying. I don't know what I'm doing here other than wasting everyone's time. Is that the case, sir? I'm sorry to hear that, but I should tell you that I believe the people in charge won't let you leave until they're 100% certain that you do or don't have powers. You may want to convince them very quickly if you want out. Leonardo angrily took the phone away from his ear and hit the end call button, then tossed the phone onto the counter and stood there glaring at the entranceway to the hallway that Hugo had vanished down. The man reappeared and smoothly went over to where the phone had stopped on the counter to pick it up. Not once did Hugo's eyes stop staring at Leonardo. Do you want something else from me, person? Why, yes, I do, Leonardo, and yes, there is. But I fear it will not go over well with you. None of this is going to go over well with me right now. So you can put aside that fear. I'm already pissed off. Yes, good. I need a bit more of that from you. Some say such anger draws out heroes' powers. So if you want to get out of here... Hugo moved back towards the entranceway, waving goodbye with the same hand that he held the phone in. This was not enough of an answer for Leonardo, so he moved to chase after him. A ladder had extended from the hole in the roof down to near the television, and Hugo had jumped up onto it, and it was beginning to automatically rise by the time Leonardo burst into the living room. He tried to jump and grab at Hugo's feet when he got over there, but these were mostly out of his reach, except for the tips of his fingers, which just grazed it. Good, Mr. Masked Butler, very good. Let anger run through you. Wake up your powers, and maybe we will let you and the other invisible creature out of its jail cells. Toodles! With Hugo out of his grasp and quickly disappearing, Leonardo sat down heavily on the couch. He came to the decision to close his eyes and let him think about all of this. Well, this is crap. I don't have powers, and yet people think I have powers. Hugo was definitely gone by this point, and Leonardo was just sitting on the couch, half pouting, half trying to think, not really thinking. But it was at this time that one superhero that he hadn't seen much of since the rough introduction in the backyard strolled in. The man looked him over, then around, then back at Leonardo. Where is everybody? The man was dirty and looked like he'd been working hard on something. No idea. You're, Gordy, right? Yep. I thought you didn't have much strength. Well, I might not have much more than a typical human might have. Why? What's that got to do with where my friends are? It doesn't have anything to do with where your friends are, supposedly, maybe. But it looks like you've been digging. The man went stiff and then slowly backed out of the doorway. He looked down at himself and then up at Leonardo, a move that so caught Leonardo off guard that he blinked a few times and opened his mouth to protest at the suddenness, and then he realized, however, this would be futile, and jumped up to give chase. There was, Leonardo hoped, only one place that this guy was going to go. His bedroom, to clean himself up. If he went anywhere else, well, he would have no idea where this man might be. He dropped down the ladder, leading to the hallway leading to the bedrooms, just in time to see a door close. He suspected that it was Gordy's room, but was unsure and not really paying attention as he hurried over to it, and then stopped at the doorway. His hand was ready to knock, but his other hand was already trying to grab the door handle. Was it okay to simply charge into a superhero's room? It didn't seem like a good idea, because there were superpowers, and all of that coming flying at him was not fun. It took his mind all of a few seconds to decide on knocking on the door, A few seconds passed before it was thrown open, and Leonardo found himself grabbed and then dragged in. To his surprise, he found himself held by a half-naked Gordy. Well, not really held, he seemed to be hanging in the air, while Gordy was a few feet away from him, and with a clenched fist. It did feel like something was grabbing at Leonardo, but he couldn't really decide whether this was the more important thing, since he found himself unable to find any ground to step on. This grip on his shirt was already loosening, and Leonardo tried to glance downward to see where he was stood, only to find that he was in front of a very big hole. Take a very nice and long rest, curious one. It's time to find out something. The hero let go, and Leonardo felt himself falling. This sensation of falling lasted for a while, and all that Leonardo knew to do and hope for was to keep his feet pointed downwards. Not that it was going to do him much good, since it seemed he was falling for quite a while, and he would splat into anything solid should it come up. It was dark in this tunnel area, or whatever it was, and the sense of anything sort of smudged together with panic of, oh no, I'm falling. This came to a screeching stop as he emerged into a lit tunnel. But he did not hit the ground with a splat or a thump or a splat. He had been slowed down and gently dropped onto the floor, on his feet, by something. He glanced upward, hoping and figuring that might have been Gordy's doing, but in all of this darkness above him, it seemed not worth the effort to really look up. The tunnel in front of him, when he looked down towards it, seemed echoey and empty, except a cart came flying by in a few seconds, and that was rather disturbing. The only other thing that was going on was some torches actually lit by fire, and that kept burning away on the sides of this tunnel. Are you guys trying to tunnel your way out, and without the watchful eye of the bastards keeping you here noticing? Yeah, good luck with that. Still, he was curious to see how far they'd gone, and began walking, following these flickering torches. The trip going down this tunnel gave him a lot of time to think. Supposedly there was a version of him caught above ground, but he didn't think it was him. The itchy feeling in the back of his mind said there was something off about it, like his memory was brought along for the trip, but it was not actually him. And the fact that it felt very convenient kept coming to him. Why? He shook his head. It felt like he hadn't been really in control of that journey, though he did feel like he had ordered whatever it was to do things in that invisible body. Although those orders did feel a couple of seconds off. His train of thought was broken up when he saw Francine at the end of the tunnel, moving rather big rocks about the place. He stood there wondering if he should say something like hello, or if that would wind up with him getting tossed around like a doll again. She stopped what she was doing, however, to wipe away some sweat with her sleeve, and in doing so, noticed him. "Oh, hello, what are you doing down here?" Gordy dropped me off, said something about finding out about things. But he also was looking for all of you. She'd grabbed another rock and crushed it into smaller pieces, and then dumped it into a nearby wagon cart. This, by the way, isn't what you think it is. So you are not a chain gang breaking up rocks for the man, then? That is not what you thought. No, it isn't. So are you a chain gang or not? I have to say, before you respond, Gordy's reaction to me calling him dirty and looking like he had been digging made it seem like you aren't one. She had crushed another rock and threw those bits into a wagon, which was just about full. And then she went over towards this, and with a mighty kick it roared off down the tracks it had been set on. The clatter and screech of its wheels were soon gone. We aren't a chain gang, but we do this to help the world. Few people can work down here, as it gets so hot to get these rocks. It isn't hot down here, though. Will you shut up and take an answer already? What's with the prying? Why do you question things? Were you sent by Hugo and company? No, I was not sent by Hugo. I'm only trying to get out of here because I don't belong. I'm not a hero. Although, apparently everybody, including Hugo, thinks that I am. The tunnel wall in front of them began to crumble where it came to an end. The two looked over. As the rock wall collapsed in, a big hole emerged, at the end of it, and then in walked Catalina, beaming. "I have found you, masked butler." "Yeah, but how?" "I have my ways. Now shall we escape?" End of Part 7 of The Lost Adventures of a Maybe Hero. Thank you for listening.